The Book on Masks, your comprehensive guide to the manipulative psychology, malformed philosophy, and misrepresented science that supercharged a global hysteria. Written and read by Philip Buckler. To everyone, everywhere, who has worn a mask against their will. Introduction. Mask Hysteria. In 2020, the world went mad for masks. Enough said. The more distant we get from the year 2020 and the COVID crisis in general, the more tempting it becomes to view the subject matter in this book as dated, perhaps even irrelevant. I believe that would be a mistake. To be sure, there is an element of truth to such a belief in the sense that new scientific studies on masks will be published and new related case law will be handed down in the coming years. These may or may not find their way into future editions of the Book on Masks, which themselves may or may not be written. In the broader sense, however, good evidence, good science, and good arguments do not become bad evidence, bad science, and bad arguments with the passage of time. Bad legal decisions may be overturned, but good rulings which accurately conform to a higher law tend to stick around long after the judges that drafted them. Likewise, the bad science, bad reasoning, and destructive beliefs that fueled the COVID crisis will not look any better 100 years from now. If anything, the opposite is likely to be the case. The science on masks is important, but the behavioral psychology harnessed to drive masking and the opposing philosophies and belief systems at war beneath the surface are as old as civilization. They have been relevant for every generation prior to 2020, and they will remain relevant for every generation after 2020. Masks were such an explosive issue because of how many deeper issues they tapped into. To get to the deeper issues, however, we need to first deal with the most public points of debate. You will find in this book the most comprehensive and thorough, and hopefully digestible, review of the science on masks yet written. By the time you are halfway through this book, you will know far more about masks than every public health official and authority who eagerly forced one onto you, your friends, and your loved ones. If you read this book cover to cover, you will know far more about all aspects of face masks than any of the experts who aggressively recommended that you wear one, or any of the authorities who are busily turning those recommendations into mandates with very real penalties that violated the Bill of Rights. You will also be equipped to stand in the forefront of pushing back on masks if you choose to do so. My goal with this book is not merely to provide readers with the single most comprehensive and effective arsenal of information available when it comes to all things mask-related, though this would be ambitious enough. My goal is to equip readers to recognize and counter the next manifestation of the masking mentality when history starts to rhyme again, as it inevitably will. If you picked up this book because you saw compulsory masking for what it was from the very start, you can justly derive satisfaction from that. If you picked up this book because you came to question masks more gradually, cut yourself some slack. Escaping from Jonestown has always been harder than staying out of it in the first place. In either case, keep those critical faculties honed to a fine point and apply them consistently in other areas of your life. This book is intended to be modular and usable either for straight-through reading or as a handy reference volume. There are 4 main topics, 5 if you count the appendix: mask science, mask psychology, mask philosophy, and mask legalities. Other relevant topics, such as history, are distributed throughout. The appendix articulates just one of many possible sets of religious beliefs against wearing masks in the name of COVID. The sections are mutually supporting, refer to one another, and even include some overlap, but each can stand on its own. Feel free to read only those sections that interest you. If you are interested in the psychology used to push masking, but not the physical science involved, go ahead and jump to that section. If you want to know more about the side effects of masks, you can start there instead. If you want to know more about the law involved, how some lawsuits against masks succeeded and why others failed, start with the legal section. If the idea of religious objections to wearing masks sounds either totally insane or intriguing, you are welcome to jump to the appendix straight away. Where's your public health degree? I do not have one, and I do not need one. Neither do you. Based on the average performance of people with public health degrees during the COVID crisis, a public health degree might be as much of a liability as an asset. In his presentation to the 15th annual meeting of the National Science Teachers Association, held in New York in 1966, Nobel Prize-winning physicist Richard Feynman said, "Science is the belief in the ignorance of experts." In the same talk, he also said, There is a considerable amount of intellectual tyranny in the name of science. Dr. Feynman explained, when someone says science teaches such and such, he is using the word incorrectly. Science doesn't teach anything. Experience teaches it. If they say to you, science has shown such and such, you might ask, how does science show it? How did the scientists find out? How? What? Where? It should not be science has shown, but this experiment, this effect has shown. And you have as much right as anyone else, upon hearing about the experiments, but be patient and listen to all the evidence, to judge whether a sensible conclusion has been arrived at. Good evidence does not become bad evidence with the passage of time, and bad evidence does not become good evidence no matter who cites it or how many people cite it. Having credentials does not make an expert. Doing the work makes an expert. The first working airplane was not built by experts. Instead, the first airplane was built by a pair of bicycle mechanics who never went to college, but who did a lot of independent reading. The medical field is no exception. I am an expert on masks because I did the work. You too can be a genuine expert on masks, and at the cost of considerably less time and effort. For what it is worth, I have earned my living for over a decade by aerosolizing the contents of multiple strangers' mouths into my face on a daily basis, otherwise known as practicing dentistry. Dentists wear masks more than most MDs, but that is not why I am worth listening to when I talk about masks. I am worth listening to on this topic because I have spent more time and effort researching all aspects of masks than is typically spent researching all aspects of dentistry over the course of a 2 or 3 year postgraduate dental residency. I have very mixed feelings about that. Public health graduate programs do not even have so much as a single 1-credit class devoted to masks any more than do dental schools or medical schools. At the most, when you go through one of these programs, you get a few PowerPoint slides as part of the information fire hose you are drinking from. One of your clinical instructors then walks you through the basics, and then you practice the infection control rituals you have been taught without thinking much about them until they become a habit from which any deviation feels very uncomfortable. You assume that someone somewhere put out the effort to make sure it wasn't all a bunch of woo-woo voodoo, or worse. Aha! You have a bias! I have strong and sincerely held beliefs about masks, obviously. No one writes a book like this without some passion for the subject. Anyone with an opinion one way or the other about masks could be accused of having a bias. The important question is, why do I believe what I believe about masks? What is the basis for my beliefs? Motivated reasoning and confirmation bias are, unfortunately, part of human nature. If everyone has conclusions in search of answers, then the only real option is to weigh the arguments and evidence as best you can while respecting others' right to live according to their differing beliefs. As U.S. Supreme Court Justice Frank Murphy said in 1943, it is in that freedom and the example of persuasion, not in force and compulsion, that the real unity of America lies. The burden of proof is on you. Any claim to knowledge entails a burden of proof. The person who makes the claim bears the burden of showing why their claim is so. If someone says you should wear a mask, the burden of proof is on them, not you. If you counter that someone should not wear a mask, then you also have a burden of proof. All I really need to show is that the arguments and evidence in favor of masks are not sufficient to justify forcing everyone to wear one. In order to generate a moral or legal duty to wear a mask, showing by a preponderance of the best quality, clear and convincing evidence that masks are effective at mitigating the spread of respiratory viral infections is merely the first of several steps the pro-mask side of this debate needs to successfully make. Each part of this book contains all of the references cited in that part. The reference citation style varies between parts. Personally, when I am reading, sometimes I like to check an author's references immediately, and sometimes I prefer to go back and do so later because immediate checking breaks the flow of my reading. I assume this is the same for other people. When I check an author's references, I like the process to be as convenient as possible. I do not like hunting back to an index, looking up references by number or alphabetical order, and then having to find my place again, or looking up and downloading a separate document. I personally prefer footnotes, though I had to forego making much use of them in the science sections because some of the citations are so heavily referenced that there would be several points at which whole pages would be nothing but redundant footnoted references. What I do not like in footnotes is looking down to see a sequence of IBID entries going back multiple layers to one that says, see abridged title Supra, when the Supra is 40 notes or 40 pages earlier. These are pet peeves of mine, and so this book does not have those things. The trade-off is that avoiding this entails some redundancy in the footnotes and using more ink and paper. I prefer to let people speak for themselves in their own words, and so I quote many sources at length. It is very important to me that readers not have to take my word for anything, and that they be able to check my sources as quickly and easily as possible. I have therefore hyperlinked, cited, and referenced each section in a way that I as a reader tend to prefer, trying to find a good balance between readability and ease of reference without too much redundancy, often eschewing reference formatting conventions to do so. I intentionally made use of as many publicly available sources as possible, though some of the linked sites, such as ResearchGate and archive.org, require free registration to access the relevant material, and others simply are not publicly available without paying, except possibly through the resources of one's local public or university library. For those sources which are not publicly available, which any readers may wish to verify, I invite those readers to either contact me through this book's website, www.thebookonmasks.com, after browsing the Extras section, or use the opportunity to develop their own skills as researchers. All hyperlinks were functional and accurate at the time of publication. Additional material mentioned in this book, such as my free and printable poster chart showing at a glance how the CDC's references stack up and balance against a more comprehensive body of scientific sources on masks, can be accessed at www.thebookonmasks.com/extras. In a work this size, expect to find plenty of material that is new to you, and some material you already knew, viewed from a different angle. Expect to find material you dispute, and even more material you agree with. Your time is valuable to me. I look forward to repaying your investment and earning a place on your bookshelf. Sincerely, Philip Trowgett Buckler, DDS. Author's note for audiobook listeners. In this book as a whole, it was very important to me to quote directly from the sources I am citing. Part 1, which covers the science of mask efficacy, is especially data-dense and heavy with direct quotations from the source material. In the printed book, I make use of multiple aids like formatting and visual cues to help break up this information into categories and studies and make it more digestible. These aids do not translate well into an audio format, and so the rapid-fire presentation of information can feel overwhelming, especially in Part 1, where we survey more than 250 scientific studies on masks in just 2.5 hours. I have tried to use tone, cadence, and other vocal cues to indicate where I am quoting the primary source, but the results still fall short of the clarity conveyed by a set of quotation marks on paper. Additionally, there are more than 40 charts, tables, and illustrations that cannot simply be read into an audiobook format. As a special gift to purchasers of this audiobook, therefore, I am providing a full-color, unabridged, searchable copy of the entire book as an accompanying PDF. If you listen to Part 1 on the science of masks, focus on the big picture and main points. Avoid feeling pressured or getting distracted and bogged down by trying to retain every detail, percentage, and supporting example. All the details and precise numbers will be there for you later with hyperlinked references if and when you need to refer to them.